This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. My darling girl, when are you going to realize that being normal is not necessarily a virtue? It rather denotes a lack of courage. It's practical magic, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We have most of our segments. We do not have a Guess Who this week, but we have everything else and lots to talk about in this wonderful first episode of our spooky season spectacular. We're going to try something a little different for the summary this time. Normally we read both the summary for the book and the movie if they're different enough. Sometimes we just do one if they're similar enough. Kind of realized that maybe reading the book summary might spoil kind of some of my questions and stuff and discussion later. So we're going to try this now and only do the movie summary. So that way you have at least some grounding if you have never read or watched this for kind of what happens. And then you can kind of find out where the differences lie as we go through the main episode. Let us know what you think of just reading the summary of the movie. Also, you can just skip all of this if you want by going to this time code, 524. But if you do like this kind of idea of just doing the movie, let us know. We're going to try it because it seems to make sense to us. Anyways, here's the summary for the movie.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Here is the summary of the movie, sourced from Wikipedia. In a small Massachusetts town, the Owens family has been regarded with suspicion for over 3 centuries due to their ancestor Maria Owens, who survived an execution attempt for witchcraft. Heartbroken when the father of her unborn child never returned. Maria casts a spell, heartbroken when the father of her unborn child never returns to her, Maria casts a spell to prevent herself from ever falling in love again. The spell developed into a curse upon Maria's descendants, dooming any man in Owens' woman loves. In the present, Jillian and Sally Owens are taken in by their aunts Frances and Jet after both their parents succumb to the Owens curse. As children, Sally and Jillian are frequently ridiculed by the town's school children. After witnessing their aunt cast a love spell for a woman obsessed with her beloved, Sally casts a spell on herself to ensure that she will only fall in love with a man who possesses certain impossible traits, with the goal that she will never fall in love. Meanwhile, Jillian, witnessing the same incident, cannot wait to fall in love. When the girls are teens, Jillian elopes with her boyfriend and leaves for Los Angeles. Before Jillian departs, she and Sally make a blood spell to always be faithful to one another. Jillian spends the next decade moving from relationship to relationship across the country while back in Massachusetts. Sally meets and marries a man named Michael. The two have 2 young daughters, Kylie and Antonia. After Michael is fatally hit by a truck, Sally and her daughters return to live with the aunts. Realizing that the aunts secretly cast a love spell on her so that she could marry and be happy, Sally says the aunts will never teach her daughters magic. Jillian unexpectedly tells Sally that she has become involved with a dangerously abusive man named Jimmy Angelov. When Sally arrives to rescue her sister, Jimmy holds them both hostage in his car. Sally puts belladonna into Jimmy's tequila to sedate him, but inadvertently kills him instead. The sister takes his body back to the aunt's house where they attempt to resurrect him using a forbidden spell, which causes him to return and attack Jillian. Sally kills him again, and the sisters bury his remains in the garden. State investigator Gary Hallett arrives from Tucson, Arizona in search of Jimmy, who is also a serial killer. Sally breaks down and confesses to Gary only to realize he is the impossible man from her childhood love spell. Unable to deny their attraction, they kiss. Returning home, Sally discovers that Jimmy's spirit has possessed Jillian's body. Gary sees Jimmy's spirit emerge from Jillian, and then Jimmy tries to possess Gary but is turned away by his silver badge. Sally tells Gary that he is there because of her spell that she cast as a child, and that the feelings they have for each other are not real, and that the family curse will ultimately kill him if they pursue a relationship. Gary replies that curses only work if one believes in them before returning to Tucson. Jimmy possesses Jillian again and tries killing Sally before Francis and Jet return, realizing she must embrace magic to save her sister. Sally asks the aid of the townswomen, and they form a coven to exorcise Jimmy's spirit. They break the Owens curse, exorcising Jimmy's spirit and allowing the coven to exile him permanently. In Tucson, Gary clears the stepsisters of any suspicion in Jimmy's case and returns to Massachusetts to be with Sally. The Owens women are finally welcomed into the community by the townsfolk, who now accept them as witches. There's your summary. Let's get into it. I have lots of questions in. Was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
All right, so the movie opens up. We actually start on a flashback, or back in time. I guess it's not a flashback at this point because we haven't really established. No, it is, because we get a narration from current time, or actually we get a flashback, or we get a narration from not even current time, depending on what you consider.
Yeah.
We get narration from when our two main characters are little kids, their aunts, recalling the story of their family to them, and they're explaining the story of Maria Owens, who is their ancestor. And in the opening of the film, we get this scene play out where she is being hung by I call them pilgrims. I don't know have a better term for what they are. They look like pilgrims, but it's like this Salem witch trials kind of deal. Except they're hanging her, and she ends up surviving this hanging via magic and gets away. And they're all like, "All right, fine, just go live over there, you weirdo." And I wanted to know if that's how the book opens, because I liked opening on that kind of dramatic historical piece.
So their ancestor Maria is from the book, and we do eventually learn what her backstory is, but it is not nearly as dramatic as an escaped execution.
Okay.
Basically, in the book, she's a single woman with a child, very scandalous,
Yeah.
who eventually is spurned by her married lover. Everyone does think that she's a witch, but there's no attempt to hang her for it.
By the way, that is the other half that I didn't mention in the movie. She is pregnant, and her lover does not return, and that is why she cast the spell. But yeah, I didn't mention that part.
I liked the movie's decision to make this change, though. I think it works well with at least the general perception of that period of history.
Yes.
And I also like the decision to open with the backstory. I think it does a good job of like setting the mood for the rest of the film.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was a very engaging opening.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of her, she then puts. She then casts a spell because her lover does not return, that she will never fall in love again. And then this Maria Owens character, their ancestor, and then this sort of morphs into a curse on her entire lineage that basically kills any men who fall in love with Owens women, kind of as a weird, monkey's paw version of the spell she casts on herself to keep herself from falling in love. And I wanted to know if that ancient curse from the ancestor is that kills Owens men, whatever. If that comes from the book.
I don't recall there being a curse in the book. I felt like I was second guessing myself as I was trying to answer your questions.
Interesting. Okay.
But I don't think there was a curse in the book, and I was flipping back
it's
through,
very
and I
explicitly
couldn't
mentioned a lot of times in the movie,
and I couldn't find anything about it. So I don't think that's from the book. I'm happy to be corrected by someone who's read it more than I have.
I didn't mention it. I didn't include this in my question. Is there anything with the Death Beetle thing or whatever? The Death Watch beetle? What is that in the book? How is that brought up?
It comes up in the same way with Sally's husband.
Okay. But it's not like a recurring thing? Does it mention before that or at all? Or?
I don't think so.
Okay. That would surprise me for it not to have been in the book, because it seems so critical to kind of the entire story. But I'm not saying I'm not saying wrong. It would surprise me for that not. That's one where that really felt like something that definitely would have come from the book. So that'd be interesting if for it not to have. Is that why then? So in the film, Sally and Jillian are two main characters played by Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock in the film. They live with their two witch aunts because their mom died of a broken heart after her husband, their father, died because of the curse. So do they end up living with their aunts?
They do come to live with the aunts because their parents died but they died at the same time in a fire.
Okay, so a different story. Yeah,
Yeah.
because in the film, it's definitely the husband dies because of the curse, and then they say the mom dies because of like a broken heart or whatever. They
hmm
go into detail, but okay, so it's definitely different. So that because that lends at least more credence to the idea that maybe there's not a curse because of them both dying at the same time in a fire. Could still be a curse, but it's not. The movie's version is very explicitly like the
Yeah,
husband
the
dies
husband
because
always
of this
dies.
curse. Yeah, interesting. Okay. So then a thing that I don't know if I was expecting in this movie, and we don't get a ton of it, but because in the trailer and stuff, you pretty much only see, Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman as adults. We actually spend a little bit of time seeing their characters, Sally and Jillian, as children
hmm
and seeing them kind of grow up as young witches. And I wanted to know if the book kind of follows that same narrative structure of kind of going through their whole lives.
Yeah, their childhood and adolescence covers a good chunk of the book. And the movie is not far off from what's in the book. There's just obviously a lot more of it.
Right. That makes sense. So one of the things we learned about Sally very quickly from a very young age, because of what happened to her mom and her dad, she is terrified of falling in love, doesn't want to fall in love. And Jillian, despite this, desperately likes the idea of being in love. And they kind of voice this after they see their aunts cast a love spell. And Sally's like, I don't ever want to be in love. And Jillian's like, I can't wait. Is that a similar dynamic? Does that dynamic come from the book?
To me, it read more like neither of them wanted to fall in love in that moment,
Okay.
because they do witness like the very grisly love spell with the dove. And they have witnessed previously like all of these desperate women who come to their aunts seeking magical cures for their love-based problems.
Yeah.
So both of them are kind of like, ugh, no. But Sally maintains that more as she grows up than Jillian does.
I thought that was I thought that I liked it in the film that they kind of had those opposite perspectives even from a young age, because it helps, it kind of, it at least clarifies the path that they end up on, the both of them, and
Mhm.
how different they are even from a young age, where Jillian goes and becomes this, free spirit jumping from relationship to relationship and kind of always in search of love, whereas Sally is very much the opposite of that. Which I thought was interesting, and yeah, I think kind of sparking that or starting that from a young age made sense in the film. But I think the way the book does it works fine too. So then, because Sally doesn't ever want to fall in love, she decides she's going to cast a spell on herself that will basically keep her from being able to fall in love, because she says that her one true love will be this man, and she describes this man that is one green eye, one blue eye. Like his favorite shape is a star. He can flip pancakes in the air, like all these like random things.
Mhm.
With her thought being that this is nobody has all these specific
It's
features.
an impossible man.
An impossible man. So it's like, I can ride the horse backwards. I will never fall in love because this man doesn't exist. So if I cast a spell, like it basically means I won't ever have to fall in love, and thus I won't lose anybody.
Yeah.
Does that come from the book? Because I thought that was fun.
This is not from the book, but I did like that change, especially because the part where Sally and Gary are like destined soulmates is from the book.
Okay.
So I think that this backstory helps explain that part a little bit more.
Is there any explanation as to like why they're soulmates, or is it just like the vague concept
destiny,
of like okay,
fate?
Interesting. Yeah, no, I like that a lot in the film. I thought that was fun. That like, and especially the like piecing together the mystery that this guy is.
Yeah, for sure.
This, as like we learn more and more about him, and he's like kind of reveals all these little details about himself that like fall in line in kind of weird ways with the spell that she cast. I thought that was fun. I liked that a lot. So then we move forward in time quite a bit, and they're adolescents at this point. And Jillian runs away in the middle of the night to like elope with some guy, and then Sally's still at home because she's kind of, again, she's like the homebody who doesn't want to fall in love. I suppose they assume they're supposed to be like 18 or something. And Sally and her aunts are discussing Jillian's love life as they're walking through town. And one of the aunts says, or I think Sally says, she's just going through these guys. And one of the aunts responds by saying, hopefully someday she'll find a guy who goes through her. And that line got me, and I wanted to know if it came from the book.
I don't recall that being from the book. I was not able to get my hands on an ebook copy this time so that I could search for particular lines, but I do think I would have remembered that one.
I think you would remember that one. That's a great line. fantastic. So then we find out, we move forward in time. Sally is now older and she meets a man, falls in love. A guy named Michael who lives in the town that they're in, falls in love with him. They ended up getting married. They have 2 kids together. And then he gets hit by a truck and killed. And then after he dies, she goes home to live with her aunts. And they reveal to her that when she was young, and I think we actually see this in the movie earlier, or at least it's alluded to before she meets the husband, that this happened, and then confirmed later that her aunts actually cast a love spell on them, on Sally and Michael, who was their husband, so that they would, because they wanted Sally to be happy, they wanted her to fall in love with somebody, so they cast a little love spell, and she's very mad at them about this. And I wanted to know if they cast a love spell on young Sally to get her with Michael. And then 2, because that's fucked up. But then 2, does her husband subsequently get hit by a truck and killed, or bus or whatever?
I'm again happy to be corrected about this, but I don't recall the aunts casting a love spell on Sally being in the book. Couldn't find anything about it when I went back to look. But her husband does die when he gets hit by a car.
Okay, same thing, same kind of deal. Like they've been married for
they've been married for X amount of years. They have kids, and he just gets taken out.
Gotcha. So speaking of the kids, when Sally returns to live with her aunts after their Michael passes away, she vows when she's returning, look, we're coming to stay with you because I need a place to stay, but you will not teach my children magic because magic has, in her eyes, ruined her life, and she just wants to be normal. And that's one of the things she loved about being with Michael, is it all felt very normal. And so she goes, she doesn't want her children to learn magic. And I wanted to know if Sally's vow that her children won't learn magic is from the book, because that's a very classic, like, this kind of character thing, I feel like.
There wasn't like a dramatic vow moment like there is in the movie, but it is similar. She wants her children to be as normal as possible. She doesn't want them to learn magic.
So then we get to find out what Jillian is up to, who they call Jilly most of the time in the movie. Find out what she's up to is Nicole Kidman's character, because again, she ran off when she was 18 and eloped, and or I don't even know if she necessarily eloped. She just ran off with a boy when she was 18 or 17 or whatever. And she's kind of just been living a free-spirited life out, doing her own thing, and has not been home in a decade. She's been however long,
partying and dancing.
Yeah, that's all we see in the movie, is just her by a pool, like, dancing. Very funny. But she then meets a guy named Jimmy Angeloff, who she falls for very hard, who's Bulgarian, I believe, in the film.
But he likes cowboys.
Yes, he likes cowboys.
He's a Bulgarian cowboy.
And she calls him, she specifically calls him a cowboy vampire or something like that, or cowboy Dracula. And he's this very strange guy. And we will later find out he is very abusive. And I wanted to know if Jimmy Angeloff, he becomes essentially the antagonist of the film. And I wanted to know if Jimmy Angeloff similarly becomes kind of the antagonist of the film.
Jimmy is from the book.
Book. You know what I meant. Anyway,
yeah.
Sorry.
Jimmy is from the book. There are some differences. I don't believe he's Bulgarian, and he's a drug dealer. He doesn't end up being a serial killer.
Yeah, spoilers in the film. It is revealed that he's a serial killer.
Yeah,
or at least has killed one person.
Yeah, Wikipedia says he's a serial killer.
But in the movie they only mentioned one woman, right?
I think. I don't know. He had a lot of pictures.
He had a lot of pictures
spread out,
but he only specifically mentions, like, oh, they found, like, because it would have been so easy for him to say, like, he says, like, oh, they found this girl dead on the side of the highway, strangled or whatever.
Yeah,
we think it was him. But he doesn't, at least from my memory, he doesn't say, and I have a half a dozen other cases just like it that I'm, you know what I mean? Like, that's such an easy line if you wanted to make him again, not that he's still a killer or whatever, but the Wikipedia specifically says serial killer, and I'm like, I don't know if the movie says he is or not, or if he's just a murderer. Anyways, that's just again, those are the little details in Wikipedia things that, like,
that, like, mess with my brain.
Drive me crazy, because I'm like, did I miss something, or is the person who wrote this, like, wrong? I don't know.
The police do come looking for Jimmy, but it's because he sold, like, basically fake LSD to some college kids, and they ended up dying.
Okay. So then, as we move forward, Sally has now been staying with her aunts for a while, but she needs to go. Is this when she goes to rescue? Yes. I
Yeah.
believe this is when she goes, Jillian calls
Yeah.
and it's like, I need help or whatever. And Sally's like, I'm coming, and is rushing off to go get her. But before she leaves, she's like, tells the aunts, hey, can you watch my daughters while I'm gone? I'll be back. I need to go help Jillian. And they're like, yeah, we got it. And she says, like, one of the aunts says, we'll take them to the solstice something.
Yeah, they're
something.
going to like the solstice celebration.
And Sally is like, but no dance, fine, or if you're gonna take them, that's fine, but no dancing naked under the moon or something like that. And I believe which one's which is Francis and Jet, but which one's
I think
can't remember which one.
Stockard Channing is Francis.
I think you're right. Anyway, Stockard Channing's character, I think it is, says the nudity is entirely optional, as you well remember, which I thought was very funny, and I wanted to know if that line came from the book.
It is not from the book. I'm positive it's not from the book because I definitely would have remembered that because I loved this line. As a sometime patron of pagan events, I can confirm that the nudity is entirely optional.
Yes. But encouraged. So, one of the details in this movie, again, not that my opinions on this will come out more as we go, but I loved this movie, and a lot of just the way it was constructed, I thought was like really well done, in terms of like the script and the direction and everything. But one of the details that I thought worked really well, that was surprising, because it's so easy for this to like work really poorly and to like feel, I don't know, kind of come out of nowhere or whatever, and it kind of almost comes out of nowhere, but the movie builds it up in a way that I thought worked perfectly. Is that in the film we find out that Jillian and Sally can like psychically communicate, essentially, and maybe even the aunts to some extent a little bit, but like specifically Sally and Jillian have this connection that allows them to like psychically communicate. And the scene that prompted this question is that specifically after she goes and picks up Jillian, and then they end up getting kidnapped by Jimmy, basically, and he tells them to go drive, and they're driving his car, like Sally's driving his car, and Jimmy is in back with Jillian, like threatening them or whatever. And in that scene, Jillian and Sally like communicate psychically with each other. Jillian tells her there's like the belladonna is in her bag. And in the film, they actually do this by like literally she looks in the mirror and you can see they're kind of like eyeballing each other. And then the movie just has Jillian literally like say it out loud. Like we see her say it, but it's very clear that she's not saying it out loud, that it is like happening in Sally's mind essentially. But they don't explain this at all. Like they don't set this up, but they do set it up. That's not true. What they do, and what I loved in the movie, is that there's little details throughout where it kind of ramps up, where like when she gets the call that something is wrong, Sally knows the phone ringing is Jillian.
Yeah.
Like she just like Jillian, like as soon as the phone rings, she like starts freaking out and knows something is wrong and knows it's Jillian and goes and answers. And there's another moment even before that, can't remember exactly what it was, where she is able to like, and it's way more subtle than the moment where literally like they like talk to each other psychically. It's just like she senses something's wrong with Jillian or vice versa or something like that. And I thought the way they built that up and then finally get to the moment where she like literally fully like psychically talks to her all worked really well without ever like having a thing where they sit down or like a voiceover line where they're like, ever since we were little kids, we've been able to hear each other's thoughts. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing like that. It just kind of organically works it in and you just buy it. And so many things in this movie happen that way that I maybe I just bought in because I don't know, but I just like so many of those things I thought were like kind of organically worked in and you just sort of accept them in a way that was so well done. All that said, my question is, are they able to psychically communicate in the book? Does that come from the book?
This does not come from the book. But I agree with you that I think this is probably one of the better done examples of psychic communication that I think I've seen in a movie. You know, not that I've seen extensively every example of this in a movie.
Right, yeah.
But I thought that their performances and the way the movie establishes their relationship and the way that it establishes kind of like the lore and like how their powers generally work made it feel perfectly natural in that moment.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing, because it starts, the way it builds is like, it builds from a place where it feels almost just like that weird normal sisterly connection.
Yeah.
into like something well beyond that. Like, okay, like they're clearly like she's literally like talking to her, and she's like, the belladonna's in my bag, like, and she like hears that in her head essentially. Yeah, I just thought it was really well done, and I could imagine in a lesser movie that coming across cheesy or
Yeah.
just not buying it or be feeling like out of like, wait, what, they can just psychically talk to each other, like why? But
Right.
it just, again, the way the
Yeah,
movie,
it feels like something we might usually have a complaint about.
yes,
But
it just,
yeah, I thought the movie did a really good job of kind of building up to it in a subtle, natural way.
yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the belladonna, Sally is able to get the belladonna and pour a bunch of it into Jimmy's tequila that he's drinking. And then he drinks a bunch of it, and it doesn't seem to work at first, but then eventually he just kind of like, and it turns out they were trying to put him to sleep because Jillian has been using the belladonna to basically put Jimmy to sleep now and then when he gets too drunk or obnoxious or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
She describes it away in a very, passive way when she comes to visit the first time about like, oh, he's so strong and he's so strong-willed and blah, and it's very, very
Yeah.
obvious what is going on there, but of a person language being used by someone in a very abusive relationship. But again, she's not voicing it that way, and Sally doesn't really pick it up in that first scene. She kind of does, but like isn't. She's like, I think, naive enough that she doesn't really get what's going on there. It was very obvious, I think, to both of us watching. But anyways. So Sally dumps a bunch of belladonna into his tequila, and it ends up killing him. And I wanted to know if they accidentally killed Jimmy with a bunch of belladonna in the book.
So that's what they think happened for most of the book. But then when they talk to the aunts at the end, and Jillian tells them like what she was been doing and like how much she was giving him and how frequently, and the aunts are like, well, that amount of belladonna could have killed him if he was a chipmunk. He probably just died of a heart attack.
Okay, so does somebody give him a big dose of it at some point in the book, or is it just the fact that Jillian has been giving him small amounts over the
She's been giving him small amounts. So one of the biggest differences,
and I think I have this question. I mean,
yeah, you have this question in a minute, is that he's already dead when Sally interacts with him.
But so when so Jillian, something happened with Jillian or whatever, is it ever explained? Did Jillian like give him a bunch at one point and then he died right after, or is it like she had just been giving him belladonna and then at some point he dies?
She had been giving him belladonna like every night.
Yes, similar to in the movie.
And then he dies, and they were like on the road, and he like keels over.
Okay.
So she goes to Sally and she thinks she's like, oh my God, I poisoned him over the course of like months or whatever.
Okay. Because in the movie, the implication is that what Sally just dumps like the entire bottle into the thing of tequila, and it's like, oh, she gave him. They are intentionally trying to like knock him out, and Sally doesn't realize how much she gives him. And I will say, I don't actually know if the movie ultimately lands on the fact that belladonna did kill him, because it's the way it plays out in the movie is very strange. I don't know if you felt this way. Is that they give him that, and nothing seems to be happening, and then he starts strangling Jilly, like trying to kill her, and Sally starts like beating on him and like punching him in the back of the head, and then she hits him one time and he immediately just like goes out, and they're like, oh, he's dead. I'm like, well, that's not how poisoning works.
Right.
And so I was wondering if he wasn't actually dead, or if actually Sally like just brained him or something. Like, I don't know. You know what I like it, because it doesn't play out like a poisoning death in the movie. It plays out like a heart attack, or not even a heart attack. It plays out like he passed out, or I don't know. It just doesn't feel like somebody dying of poison to me in the movie. And so I was wondering if it's the same idea, but the movie never actually addresses this again. Like it does seem to be the belladonna that killed him. It's just kind of happens weirdly, I guess, in the film.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the implication in the movie is that they killed him somehow. Yeah. Somehow he died at their hands. Yeah. Which ends up not being the case in the book.
Gotcha. Okay. So anyways, after Jimmy dies, they're now freaking out and figuring what they should do, and they decide to just take him back home. And as they're driving, this whole movie, Jillian is a smoker. She has become a smoker over the years, and she's smoking cigarettes. And Sally tells her, like, you really should quit. And I love this moment because Jimmy is sitting in the back of the car dead, and Jillian says, "Look, I'm probably going to get a life sentence. I should smoke 2 at once. It'll shorten my sentence." And that was a great line, and I wanted to know if it came from the book.
That does come from the book, and it got a chuckle from me as I was reading it.
Nice. So then they get him back home, and their plan, they realize as they're heading back, is like, we should resurrect him. Because earlier, Sally had begged the aunts to resurrect Michael, and they're like, no, you don't want to resurrect somebody, because if they come back wrong. Classic,
Classic trope. We've covered that trope before.
Yes.
They always come back
They
wrong.
always come back wrong. So you don't want to resurrect Michael, and they're like, well, but we can resurrect Peter, bring him back. It doesn't matter.
Jimmy,
sorry, Peter.
Peter. I changed some of that in your notes in some places. You kept calling him Peter, and I couldn't figure out why.
Is Peter? I don't know.
I don't think there's even a character in this named Peter.
No idea why my brain keeps wanting to say Peter. Jimmy. And they decide they're going to resurrect him. And the reason the kind of justification for it that I thought was great, they're like, look, it doesn't matter if he comes back dark and unnatural, which is what the aunts had warned would happen with Michael. It doesn't matter if Jimmy comes back dark and unnatural, because he already is. And I was like, this is great. That's fantastic.
So incredibly, the entire resurrection plotline, which is kind of like the main thing that I feel like people know about this movie, this is entirely a movie invention. It does not happen in the book at all. In the book, he's already dead and they bury him. They don't try to resurrect him.
Wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that line is also not from the book, and that's a great line. I love that moment too.
Yeah. Well, that ruins my next couple questions. So there's this during the resurrection, they have to like draw symbols on them, and the only thing they have on hand in the kitchen at the aunt's house is a can of whipped cream, and so they literally spray a whipped cream pentacle or whatever, the star thing, on his chest. And I was wondering if it was in the book, because my favorite detail of that is Sally then gets some on her finger and eats it, and I just thought it was great. I loved it so much.
So yeah, based on my last answer, you can probably infer that this does not happen in the book, but I did really like this. I thought that was a genius comedic scene.
Yeah, it's so good. And then my last question regarding the resurrection was that after they resurrect him in the movie, he comes back and immediately just starts trying to kill Jillian again, because of course, I don't know what else he expected to happen. Like, I get the idea behind it. I do think it was like not the worst idea in the world. Maybe you should have like handcuffed him or something first, and then just like left him.
Yeah, just go leave him at a bus stop or like at a police station.
Yeah, exactly. Go leave him at a police station, just like handcuffed or like whatever. They would have thought it through a little bit. They could have got away with all this without any issue. But yeah, they just resurrect him, and he immediately starts trying to kill Jillian again. And so Sandra Bullock grabs a cast iron pan and just like clobbers him over the head and immediately kills him again. And I love that she just hits him, and we don't even get like their reaction or like, oh my God, is he okay? Or like nothing. They just hard cuts from her hitting him to them digging a shallow grave in their yard. And I thought that edit was fantastic. So I assume that obviously that doesn't come in there.
Yeah, so probably you can confer that she doesn't immediately kill him again. They do bury him in the backyard. So that is the similarity to the book.
That scene was so good, though. That whole scene was great. I loved it. She just immediately clonks him over the head and kills him again. They're like, well.
I thought he was going to be alive for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And then she just immediately kicks him out again. I was like, well, that was short-lived.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Good Lord.
Literally short-lived, yeah. So then we move on a little bit in time, I think, at this point. But there's a scene a little bit later that I was very confused with initially, because Sally is asleep in bed and Jilly comes up and just goes, margaritas. And I was like, wait, what? What time is it? And then I didn't hear, she says midnight margaritas. And then Sally and Jilly run downstairs because her aunts are making margaritas in a blender, which we actually saw them doing first. They're like they're making a potion or whatever. They're like putting all the ingredients in.
Yeah, but then the camera pulls back and it's margaritas.
Yeah, they're making margaritas in a blender, which is great. And I wanted to know if the midnight margarita scene came from the book, because it's a lot of fun.
There is a short scene in the book where Sally and Jillian have midnight margaritas.
Okay, so it is.
Yeah, they make margaritas and they drink them outside, like under the moonlight on the lawn. Not nearly as iconic as the movie scene.
Yeah. Because then it goes on from there. They move on from margaritas. They get tired of mixing them and just decide, well, let's just drink tequila. And they're doing shots of tequila right out of a bottle. And it turns out the bottle of tequila, they as they're doing these shots, they kind of all of a sudden they're getting more and more drunk, and they're like laughing and being ridiculous. But then they're also like intermittently, each of them is like kind of snipping at the other ones and like insulting them and saying really weird things that like are completely
and
out
then
of
they'll
character.
be like, I don't know where that came from.
Yeah, and then they all laugh, and then like somebody else will say it, and they're like, "What is going on?" And then eventually, I think it's Sally, like looks at the tequila bottle, and it's the same brand that Jimmy drinks, and they're like, Sally's like, "Where did you get this tequila?" And the answer like, "Oh, it was on the porch or whatever."
Yeah.
And they're like freak out, or Sally and Jillian freak out because the ants are unaware of what's going on at this point. And I loved the idea that this like his possessed bottle of tequila showed up, and they're drinking it, and it's like slowly like infecting them. I thought that was so. It's just a great little scene, and I wanted to know if that came from the book.
It does not come from the book, but I also adored this scene. I thought it was creepy in a really subtle, interesting way.
Yeah, because you have no idea what's going on at first.
And you don't even really start to get an inkling until one of the ants starts singing the song that was on the radio when they were in the car with Jimmy.
Whatchamacallit.
And like, and all of the sudden it turns really creepy really fast.
Really quickly, yeah. Because again, initially they're just saying kind of like obnoxious things, and you're like, like at first it's kind of like, oh, that's just like a drunken, like they're just like being snippy or whatever.
It feels kind of like normal drunk behavior.
Yeah.
Like when you get really plastered and you start saying things that you would not ordinarily say to someone.
But then it goes a little weirder, and you're like, well, that was weirder than like one of them, they're like kind of like somebody's making fun of Jillian for like sleeping around or something, and then like and then there's some other line about something, and then it gets to a point where before the ants start singing the song that he was singing, there's something very specific. I can't even remember what it was, where you're like, well, that doesn't even fit in with anything that would be they would say or whatever. And then it's just the way it slowly builds is so good. I thought it was fantastic. I will never understand why this movie has like a 40% on Rotten. It blows my mind.
Well, and I think you mentioned that one review in the prequel that complained about like the tone changes and the tone shifts.
Crazy.
I think they're masterfully handled for the most part.
For the most part, yeah. I would agree wholeheartedly. And I almost wonder if this
scene is an incredible example of a well-handled tone shift.
Yeah, the whole Midnight Margaritas into the scene.
It goes from very light and very fun to extremely creepy in a snap. And it's very well handled.
Yeah, it's great. I actually wonder if it's not, I hesitate to say ahead of its time, but because often I'll say that and I'm like, well, but there are movies doing stuff like this forever. At least not forever, but like very often when I say something ahead of its time, it's like, well, yeah, but also, I have a recency bias in but I do wonder if that is part of it. It's just like, because I think if this movie came out today, I think it would be a huge hit. Like I think this movie would be like a huge success, and I think critics would love it. And I think and the tonal like shifts it totally falls in line with tons of other movies. Like it.
Yeah, I think the tonal shifts in particular do feel a lot closer to horror movies now.
Yeah, to something like Get Out or
like kind of like A24 movies kind of a deal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it is, I will say, that is maybe the only negative on the film is that, and it's not a negative, it's just if you are expecting a horror film, you would never market this as a horror film.
No, it's not really a horror
compared
film.
to something like Get Out or whatever, which has like genuinely like kind of horrifying moments. I wouldn't say anything, well, that's not true. There are horrifying moments, but it's not horror movie horrifying. It's abusive relationship horrifying.
Right.
The horrifying moments in this are all the stuff with Jimmy before he's dead. Like that, those are like truly like, at least to me, those are the moments that are like truly terrifying. And because there's not like jump scares or anything in this. It doesn't have any of the traditional like horror movie stuff necessarily. But that being said, it is a lot of the rest of it, and there is creepy stuff, and there is off-putting stuff, and a lot of the rest of it falls completely, like you said, falls completely in line with some of like A24 stuff or even some like Blumhouse stuff or whatever. I think it definitely kind of fits in line with like perfectly. I think I think if this movie was just released today as it is, exactly as it is, it would be.
What is interesting though is that it also reminds me a little bit of the movie Ghost.
Oh, I've only seen Ghost once, and it's been a long
I
time.
think and Ghost has like I think Ghost is
But
a
that
little
does have the tonal-
closer to being like horror than this is.
Yeah.
But there are like it's
Yeah,
a
it's-
similar kind of
yeah.
tonal shift idea
Between like
where
romance
between
and
like
comedy
romance and
horror,
comedy and horror. And Ghost was a huge hit.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. Well, and like and Ghostbusters is like a pure comedy, but,
Right.
But yeah, no, that's what I mean, and that's what I'm saying. It's not like it's completely
Yeah.
unique or like And when I say it's ahead of its time, it's like it's not like really like I don't know. It is surprised me. I think the thing is that if you don't, and I have a note about this later. I think the big thing about the reason probably why it wasn't a huge success is I think it requires like kind of a cultural osmosis, like or understanding or knowledge that maybe, and not cultural, like a media like. You have to have absorbed enough of the right kind of media for this to work, maybe. I think I've seen enough, like, culty witch stuff over the years that, like, the fact that this movie doesn't, like, explain itself ever just works for me.
Yeah.
Whereas for other people, maybe it wouldn't as much.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's a lot to do with it, because, like, I have a note about it later and we'll talk about it, but like comparing it to like some other shows and movies and stuff that I've seen, like where there's a lot of similarities there that I think maybe having had that stuff all bouncing around in my head just like kind of made this movie naturally work in a way
like
that
you had the right kind of context for it.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
That might be another part of it.
I mean, I think it's also entirely possible that there were, because I don't know anything about how this movie was marketed. Or what people were expecting, and that maybe a lot of people and critics particularly went in expecting something other than what they got.
I will say, so I watched the trailer for the prequel. I thought the trailer felt pretty in line with what the movie is. Like it bounces around between a comedy, a romance, and like but with like ghosts and like it's like I don't know. I felt like the trailer wasn't wholly out of line with what the movie ended up being. But
I don't know then. Yeah, that's really interesting because I did not have a problem with the tone shifts in this at all.
Not at all. All right, moving on. One of the details that I kind of loved is that after the whole thing with the tequila and stuff, the Sally and Jilly like won't explain. They're still kind of like staying silent on what is actually going on. And the aunts are like, all right, well, we're going to leave. And they just like fuck off.
Yeah.
And they're like, you deal with this. We're leaving. And I thought that was great. And they literally just, they say goodbye to the kids. And they tell them that they leave a message with the Sally's kids. And they're just gone in the middle of the night. And then Sally's kids the next morning are like, oh yeah, they left. They said you need to clean up your own mess. And then they just left. And I kind of love that. And again, it just kind of goes back to what I said. So much of what happened, again, that's another beat that feels like in a different movie or I don't know, in another movie would feel like I would criticize. I'm like, wait, they just leave and like there's not really an explanation as to why they left. They just like kind of just like disappear and like deal with it yourself. It just feels weird, but like for whatever reason, it just feels right, and it's really hard to explain why like every decision in this movie to me just feels right when some of the stuff feels like it shouldn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyways, I want to know if they kind of just disappear in the book and let Sally and Jilly sort it out themselves.
This does not happen in the book, mostly because the movie moves the locations around.
Oh, okay.
So in the book, none of the Jimmy plot line happens at the aunt's house. It happens at Sally's house in suburban New York, where she moved with her daughters after her husband died.
Okay. So she doesn't go live with the aunts.
No, it's actually, it's like the complete opposite. Her and her husband and her daughters were actually living with the aunts. I know.
That makes
and
no
then
sense.
after he dies, she moves them all out.
I guess it could make sense in the idea that like she's not as turned off to magic, so she doesn't mind being around the ants because she hasn't had this falling out because of like her the curse or whatever. Well, again, if maybe there isn't a curse in that, whatever.
Well, and if there's no curse and they never cast a love spell on her, then she doesn't have like quite as bad of a taste in her mouth for magic. In the book, it mostly stems from like her experiences in childhood and like being ostracized and
Yeah.
like, she just wants to be normal.
Yeah. Anyways, I think that makes more sense to have her move in with the ants after because
Yeah.
she like needs, the help or
Right.
whatever,
Yeah,
basically.
she needs support.
Yeah.
One would think.
Yeah.
I agree with you that this action by the ants in the movie to just leave, it feels right.
Yeah, I don't know how to
well, and it's their characters.
Yes,
is what it is. It feels in line with what their characters would do.
Yeah.
Even though we don't actually like
know them,
all that much about them, it just feels very in line with who their characters are.
Yeah.
To be like, okay, well, you can clean up your own mess then.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're not going to tell us, like, we'd help you, but you don't seem to want...
we would help you, but if you don't want our help, then we're not going to give it.
Yeah, we're not going to get involved with, like, we're not going to mess with something we don't know.
Also, like, to me, that is kind of a very good understanding of witchcraft and, like, what witchcraft is and how that has been portrayed, like, throughout history and throughout media. It's very much like, do you remember the scene in... whichever frickin' Pirates of the Caribbean sequel it is?
Probably not, because we haven't rewatched those yet. We only watched the first one.
What's her name? I want to say Tia Dalma, but I don't know. The Caribbean woman.
I know who you're talking about, but I don't remember anything about those movies.
She gives Captain Jack a jar of dirt to protect him from...
I do remember that, yes.
Yeah, to
vaguely.
protect him from Davy Jones or the Kraken
one
of those things.
Yeah.
And the only reason I remember this is because I've seen like the gift sets so many times, and he's like, will the jar of dirt help? And she says, if you don't want it, give it back. And he says, no. And she says, then it helps.
Okay.
Like it's a very like, that's a way that witchcraft is approached and portrayed often.
Yeah, and even elsewhere in this movie, like the whole thing with Gary at the end, where curses only work if you believe in them, and I don't believe, that kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah. I also prefer the movie's decision to keep the entire story in the aunt's house.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a great location.
Yes.
Like it's a stunning set in the movie. Like it's so cool. They brought back the farmhouse sink before it was popular.
Right.
Like, when I say brought back, it's just an old house with a farmhouse sink. But yeah, they had the farmhouse sink and everything.
The way I would kill for a farmhouse sink. And that's how you know you're old.
Yeah. So then a detective shows up to investigate the disappearance of Jimmy Angelov, and he shows up at Sally and Jilly's house, and he was able to find them because Sally had sent Jillian a letter early on from that house, or from her after
her
Michael had died.
Yeah.
She sent a letter to Jillian from her aunt's house, so that's how he was able to find them there. He shows up and he's like, hey, do you guys know anything about this Jimmy guy? He's gone. I'm looking for him. I'm a detective from Tucson, Arizona. And I wanted to know, anyways, it's slowly revealed as we meet him more and more and more and find out more things about him, that he is the man that Sally made up in her spell in the beginning. And I wanted to know if that's who the detective is in the book. Oh, no, that wouldn't, because didn't you?
Yeah, her childhood spell is not from the book.
Okay,
so that's a no.
Yes, fair enough. But you said they are soulmates, supposedly, in the book. So as he's on and off, he's interrogating them, asking them questions. He's a very southern detective. He's very chill, like just kind of like wandering around talking to people.
He ambles.
Yeah, he does. He very much ambles. And I wanted to know. I love at one point he's kind of talking to Sally, and he kind of just eventually outright says it. At one point, he goes, "Look, did you or your sister kill James Angelov?" And Sally responds sarcastically, "Oh yeah, a couple of times." Great line, and I had to know if it came from the book, which at this point I would assume obviously it doesn't,
it's not from the book. Yeah, but it is a great line.
Great line, because she says, "Oh yeah, a couple of times." He's like, "Oh okay," like he rolls his eyes like, "Oh, you're being silly," but nope, telling the truth. It's fantastic. But the thing that ultimately does, he's got his suspicions, and more than suspicions at this point, that they're involved somehow in the disappearance of Jimmy. But the thing that really sets him over the edge is that they're out. He comes to visit for breakfast one day, or he comes to ask Sally some questions, and he ends up having breakfast with them. And then when they're out in the backyard, there's a big toad or frog or whatever, like sitting on a log. And we've seen throughout the course of the movie that these frogs like seem to be hanging out around, or maybe toads, whatever, around Jimmy, where Jimmy was buried. And they like kind of, or whatever, they're correlated with Jimmy's corpse or whatever. And one of them is sitting on a log, and they like walk up and they're like looking at it. And then it just like ribbits up Jimmy's ring, which he has this special ring that he wore, and it's also like his mark for when he killed, like specifically Jimmy or Gary mentioned that the girl they found killed earlier, she had a brand, which was this like ring or whatever, and so he takes this ring, and now he has like confirmation that this was Jimmy's. Jimmy was here, blah blah blah.
Jimmy was here. Yeah.
And does that come from the book?
So a toad does puke up Jimmy's ring, and Gary ultimately finds it. But it doesn't happen right in front of him like it does in the movie. The toad pukes it up in front of one of Sally's daughters, and not knowing what it is, she just like tosses it into a tchotchke dish, which is where Gary finds it.
That makes sense. So then Sally, now she's freaking out because she knows that he basically tells him, you guys need a good lawyer, and he leaves, and she's like, look, I gotta confess. She goes to Gillian and says, I gotta confess, and she runs off, and she goes to him. And she essentially confesses to him, like, well, look, we killed him. But he was, abusive. He was trying to kill, but like basically, she doesn't go through all the details, but she kind of tells him the story. And after that moment, they can't resist each other anymore because they're so destined for each other, and they just start making out. And I wanted to know if she confesses and then immediately they start making out.
Yeah, this scene is pretty similar to what happens in the book. She goes and finds him. She kind of similar to what happens in the movie. She like doesn't tell him every detail, but she tells him enough for him to surmise their kind of involvement, and then they just start macking on each other.
Fantastic. It's great. So then when she returns home after this, Jimmy has now possessed Jillian. She gets home and her daughters are like running downstairs screaming like, there's something wrong with Aunt Jillian. And she goes upstairs and Jillian is like writhing around in bed, clearly possessed. And then as soon as she gets there, also Gary saw her like running home because she realized something was wrong. Like she had like a psychic, whatever. And so she went sprinting home, and Gary saw this happening and he goes following after her. And they both kind of burst into the bedroom around the same time, and to see literally the spirit of dead corpse Jimmy rise out of Jillian's body and confront them. And Gary can see. I was thinking at first maybe Gary wouldn't be able to see it. Like, it would just be like,
he can see it.
He can see it. This is fully there. And they like him and Jimmy square off, and then Jimmy straight up tries to possess. Anyways, but does any of the possession stuff happen?
No, none of the possession stuff is from the book. One of Sally's daughters can see Jimmy's ghost, like lurking in the backyard,
which does happen in the movie.
And Jimmy does cause some like kind of poltergeist-esque trouble, moving stuff around. They lose things, that kind of stuff, but no actual possession in the book.
This was maybe the weakest part, this particular scene.
Yes, this particular scene, I think the effects didn't age.
They're not horrible, but they're not. Yes, I would say they haven't aged great, but they're not like awful. It wasn't like laughably bad, but it didn't age like amazingly, I would say.
Yeah.
Because then after this, Gary is then saved by his silver badge because Jimmy tries to possess Gary or tries to kill him or something. The book says, again, this is another one. Wikipedia says Jimmy tries to possess Gary. To me, it looked more like he was trying to like rip his heart out or something, like kill him.
It looks like
Once Upon a Time.
We've been rewatching Once Upon a Time.
Yes. I've been watching it for the first time.
Well, yeah, and we're far enough in now that I'm watching for the first time too. Because I dipped before the Frozen stuff.
Yeah.
But it looks exactly like when they plunge their fists
and
into other people's chests and rip their hearts out.
Yeah. And so again, Wikipedia says tries to possess him. I'm like, I don't know. Was he or was he trying to kill him? Either way, whatever he's trying to do, his hand gets like burned by the silver badge because it's
badge
silver
or whatever.
And obviously that's not from the book.
No, it's not.
An interesting detail.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure.
But then, so all that happens. They're able to. I believe then he just kind of like his spirit. Oh, he like turns into dust and like flies away or
Yeah.
something, and they don't know what happened to him.
His spirits away.
Yeah. And then basically Gary's like, well, Sally's like, you got to get out of here. Look, we're only feel this way about each other because I cast this spell as a child, blah, 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 all this stuff. You'll die, all that sort of things. And Gary's like, fine, I'll leave. But look, curses only work if you believe in them, and I don't. And I wanted to know if that line came from the book because I liked it.
I
identified with Gary in this moment.
Once again, happy to be corrected, but I don't believe that's from the book.
Okay. Couple more questions here. Great little detail. We find out that Sally is like she has her daughters are in elementary school or whatever, and she goes to like a PTA, or like it seems like the first, like the night before the first class or whatever, like all the parents get together.
They
and
establish the phone tree.
Yes, and they established a phone tree
for emergencies.
Yes,
because that's what they did before the internet.
Yes, and Sally ends up at the top of the phone tree. Which I don't even necessarily know what that means or what that implies or whatever. I was never a parent in the 90s, so I don't know. I'm sure my mom would know what that is. She was both a parent and a preschool teacher, so I'm sure she's well aware, but I had no idea. Anyways, point being, I think Jillian like messes with, like, does magic or something.
She magics to get Sally at the top of the phone tree.
And ends up, another one I have to know, when Jillian, is any of this come to that scene, or is it... Specifically, I wanted it because I think this is a popular line because it was like one of the top rated quotes when I was looking through the quotes on IMDb. When they roll into the class, Sally's in the class already during this meeting, and then Jillian comes in like late or whatever, and everybody's like freaking out because they haven't seen Jillian in a long time. And they're like, oh my God, it's Jillian. And Jillian walks in, and because she's kind of being like silently judged by all those people, she like decides to make a show of it, and she like starts like gyrating and is be like, "Watch, tell your husbands to look out," or something like that. She has some specific line. Does anything like that happen? That line where she like threatens to sleep with all the other women's husbands?
No.
Okay, damn it. So then she's on the top of this phone tree, and then at the end of the book, or at the end of the film, Jillian gets possessed again. And
the ants come back.
Right as Jillian is possessed again. Sally comes in from having Gary just leaving, and she thinks Jillian's fine, and they go to hug, and then realizes like Jillian is possessed because she like licks her face and is being a weirdo, and basically like punches her, just like knocks her out. And then the ants show up in that moment, and they realize they need to perform an exorcism, but they need a full coven. Right. They can't do it with just like the three, with just the three ants and then the two daughters. It's not enough. So they need
they need more women.
8 or 9.
They say like it's 8 or 9, but 12 is better or something like that.
And so the way they are able to summon an entire coven is that Sally uses her phone tree privileges from the elementary school to summon a coven of the other ladies in town. And so that's the first part. I want to know if that happens. And then second, the other thing I love this so much is that because the whole film, all these people have been like they judgmental and really obnoxious and like, again, very judgy and not kind of kept their distance from Sally and Jillian and all of the Owens women and stuff. And they've kind of been this, they're like these outcasts in town or whatever. But she calls them up, and they're all just like immediately on board. And they all just show up with brooms and everything. And I love that they all just wanted to be included in the witchcraft. And as soon as they call them up and are like, hey, we need you to come do witchcraft with us, they're like, fuck yes. And they all just show up ready to roll. It killed me. I loved it so much. And I want to know those two things, the phone tree and then all the women deciding or, secretly wanting to have been witches all along and showing up, if any of that came from the book.
All right, so I have to disappoint you because none of this ending is from the book. It
doesn't disappoint me, honestly. I mean, I guess a little bit, but it just means I won't read the book, probably.
Yeah.
Anyways.
So Sally and Jillian are not able to like fully banish Jimmy's ghost. So
does he ever possess Jillian or anything?
No.
Okay, no, okay.
So they call the ants for help. The ants come to help them. And what they do is they dissolve Jimmy's corpse with lye.
Well, they do that in the movie.
Yes.
They make a big stew.
A big lye stew. Yeah. And then the ants have also brought with them a bunch of stones from their ancestral home. And they build a patio over his grave.
Oh, okay.
And that like seals him in, I guess.
It's a much more passive like
Yeah.
anticlimactic process.
Yes.
It's not as dramatic and like a big moment.
No.
Okay.
I prefer the movie's ending.
I could not get over the when they call all those women and they're all just immediately like, yeah.
Yeah.
I was not what I was expecting, and I loved it so much. I loved it so much. So in the film, they're finally able to exercise Jimmy by they try a little bit. They have to make this like a circle with their brooms or whatever. There's also a little detail. I love a woman shows up with a
Like a
a
dustbuster.
dustbuster and it's
Yeah.
like, will this work? And they're like, we got an extra one somewhere. But they make a circle with their brooms or whatever to like contain the spirit. And Jillian's like laying on the floor in the middle. It's a really cool visual scene or whatever. And they're like trying to do some chant or whatever to exorcise her or exorcise the demon. And then it like tries to like run and escape and like knocks out. And it seems they're not succeeding or whatever. And Sally has an idea and she like goes and gets a bottle of tequila and like holds it up and that like coaxes his spirit out or so. It's never
Yeah.
really exactly clear what is going on here. But again, it all, for whatever reason, I don't care. Like it just works. I'm just like, yeah, it works. And then they do, her and Sally and Jilly specifically do the blood pact from the beginning, which they made when they were when Jillian left when she was
Yeah.
like 17 or whatever. They did the slice your palms and
Yeah.
hold hands
Classic
thing.
stuff.
Yeah, and then all the rest of the women all hold hands in a circle around them, and then they're able to finally exercise Jimmy's spirit. And then the little detail I love after that is that he like turns into this big like cloud of demonic energy or whatever, and then like falls into dust on the floor.
Hmm.
And they all just use their brooms to sweep him out into the garden and into the grave, and then they dump the lye stew or whatever on top, and that's wraps that up. And I wanted to know if they sweep him out into the garden. You said the lye stew part, but I assume there's no sweeping.
No,
of his
there's no
ashes.
sweeping of his ashes in the book. I really liked that part though. That actually is like a reference to actual witchcraft. Yeah. So I really enjoyed that.
Great. Last two questions. Do Sally and Gary end up together?
Yes, they do.
Okay. I figured, but
Yeah.
and then at the end of the movie, it's fantastic. And this is a scene I talked about in the prequel where they said the town they filmed this in, they just had everybody show up in Halloween costumes or whatever. Everybody shows up, and all of the witches are on the roof. I don't know if it's any of the townswomen. It's for sure all the Owens women.
I think it's just the Owens
I think it is
women.
too. But they're all like in witch costumes on the roof. It's clearly Halloween, but they all just like fly off the roof.
Yeah.
And it seems like the whole town just knows they're witches and is like, yay, witches. And then it ends, and I love it. And I want to know if that's how the book ends.
It's not how the book ends, but I also thoroughly enjoyed this scene.
So good.
And it felt to me like the fact that at the end all of the townspeople were like, oh my God, we have witches.
Yeah.
That felt Pratchett-esque to me.
Yeah.
Like that you would be like, well, our town's
witches.
got witches.
Yeah.
Your town doesn't even have witches.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. Oh my goodness. All right, those are all my questions for Was That in the Book, but I do have a few to get into in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
So there's a few things that I was a little confused about, hoping that Katie could expand on. Maybe not. We'll find out, but I just got a couple here. First up, so early on in the film, before Michael dies, we've set up at this point in the movie that the Death Watch beetle, whatever it's called, Death Watch beetle makes a sound, and if you hear that sound, it means that somebody's about to die, which is a true thing from it is a real folk myth or whatever.
Yeah.
Sally and Jilly's mom heard it right before their dad died, and then I couldn't tell. So at one point, there's Sally and her husband Michael and their daughter, one of their daughters, is sleeping in bed together, and Sally hears this beetle. We hear the beetle. We know what it sounds like because we heard it earlier in the movie. I didn't know if Sally knew this or knew what it was, because she hears it and then it seems like it's just annoying to her because she kind of like wakes up and hears it and then like rolls over and like covers her head, and it seems more in like not like it's loud and annoying, not in like a oh my God Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
she doesn't seem like worried or anything. She just seems annoyed by this beetle sound or whatever. But then later on, when right before Michael dies, she hears it again, and it's like it falls into the floorboards,
Mm-hmm.
and she's trying to like dig it and get it out, and she's like ripping up all the floorboards in her house trying to get to the beetle, and it seems very much like she knows what this beetle is a portend of death or whatever at this point. And I was a little confused at what I was supposed to get out of that. Did she know the whole time and the first scene was just a little weird, or did she not? I don't know if you have any help for this.
Maybe. Initially in the book, when she starts to hear the Death Watch beetle chirp for her husband, she's like telling herself that she doesn't believe in omens and that nothing is going to happen. She's trying to ignore it. So I think maybe that's what the movie was going for.
I think that might be what it's going for.
Yeah.
I will say that's not what I got.
Yeah,
from
I don't.
that movie.
I don't know if that's the clearest, but I think that might have been what the movie was trying to do.
Okay, because to me, yeah, it would be the same reaction like if there was like a particularly annoying bird outside,
yeah, or like
your
a
window.
really loud cricket.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh god, and you just kind of like try to like drown it out with your pillow or whatever, and go back to sleep. Again, it just didn't feel like there was any moment in that first time she heard it of like struggling at all with what it might mean. And I don't know. That was a little strange to me, but okay. There's a scene a little bit later where Sally's kids are getting like chased by all the kids in town, and they're like calling them witches and like yelling at them. And in retrospect, I think this works a little bit better with how kind of the movie wraps up and stuff. And I don't have as much, I don't know, question, or I don't have as many questions about it kind of after having finished the movie, but it still felt a little strange to me is that they're like calling them witches and stuff. And so it seems like this town just like legitimately believes in witches because like the kids then like one of the little girls like points at one of the little boys and is like, I curse you with not smallpox. Jesus. With chicken pox, and the whole crowd is like, oh my god, like they all like freak out like it's a serious thing, and obviously in reality like most people be like, oh okay, like, whatever, you know, but like this town seems to truly believe these people are witches. And is that the vibe in the book, I guess? And because I guess my question is that it didn't seem like, I guess this is the scene where they established that, but it just kind of felt like it went from zero. I don't know. Like it was just like one of the only details in the world building that felt a little like it didn't work for me 100%. That this whole town is just like fully bought in on witches and it's like, I don't know.
I think this is a little amped up from the book. Like they're definitely outsiders in the book. People generally are like suspicious of them.
Yeah.
They don't like them. But apart from like children, I don't know that there's really any indication that the adults fully buy into the idea
and it
that
seems
they're
like they do in this
witches
scene in
with
the
powers.
movie. I could be wrong,
and I get why kids would buy in whole cloth. With the adults, it does feel a little silly. But then, like, also they're not wrong.
No, and again, with the way it ends, it works better. And I think it's just, I don't know, maybe it was just I still hadn't fully like kind of gotten into the universe of the film yet. It just something about it felt a little strange to me in a way that so many other of the like things that would feel strange to me in this movie didn't. I don't know what it is about this scene. I just like this whole town like fully believes in witches and thinks these people are this is very interesting to me. But again, I liked how it ends where they all do believe in witches and they just want to be witches and they're like want to be involved. I loved that. And so it kind of needs to be this way, I guess. It's just, I don't know. Something about it just didn't fully work for me, but it was a very small nitpick. And then my last question is when Sally goes to pick up, and obviously this is probably different in the book, but when Sally goes to pick up Jilly is in like a little motel room.
Yeah.
And she's like crying and and Sally's like, let's get out of here. I got my car. We're going to get out of here. We're going to go home or we're going to go back to the aunts. And they're leaving. And then Sally or Jilly decides she needs her tiger stone necklace or something because there's like a blood moon or something. And she needs this talisman. And so she runs over to, it's definitely Jimmy's car.
Yeah. To get it.
And when she gets in the car, Jimmy is just in the back seat.
Like lurking?
Like lurking there. And I was just unsure of like,
I mean, he is a lurker.
I guess I was just a little confused of like, did she think he had like left or something?
Yeah.
Or like what happened? I don't know.
I can't really help with this comparing it to the book because, like I've said, the movie is really different from the book. Sally does not go to get Jillian. Jillian just shows up at her house one night with Jimmy already dead in her car.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that what the movie wanted us to think was that like maybe he was like passed out in the back seat.
Oh, and she thought, yeah.
And,
because maybe she'd given him belladonna and she thought he would be asleep.
Yeah, or maybe she didn't even know he was in there, and then he like
the
woke
not
up.
knowing he's in there is what's weird to me though. Like,
yeah,
that's the part that's confusing to me. I could buy if she thought he was passed out and then surprise,
Yeah.
he's actually awake.
I mean, maybe
that falls in line
yeah.
with everything we know about them. The other thing, I guess it could be that, like, again, she thought he like went somewhere,
right?
and then actually he was just in the car. But why would he be waiting in the backseat of a car if that's the case? I think the thing that makes the most sense is that she drugged him, assumed he was still passed out,
right,
and he wasn't.
Right.
That kind of works at least. I can buy that. All right, those are all my questions. It's time to find out what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
So like I said, I really liked the way that the movie started. I did think though that we got a little bit of an info dump right at the beginning.
Yeah, we do, but
movie.
it didn't bother me.
And it's not a huge deal, but I do think that's one place where the more expansive nature of a book can have a little bit of an edge. Yeah, you can take more time to kind of dole out your backstory. You don't really have to front load the way the movie had to.
But I don't mind it as a prologue. Like, I don't mind a prologue in a movie like that. You know what I mean? Like, it just truly doesn't bother me. But I totally get what you're saying.
There's a scene in the book where when Sally is a kid, all of the cats that live on the aunt's property follow her to school, and she like can't get them to leave.
That'd be a very cute scene.
Yeah.
Just her walking, just one shot of her walking down the sidewalk from a wide, and it's like a whole thing of cats behind her.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
I will say one of the reasons that I would be glad that this didn't make it into the movie is that there is like a little boy who's a bully who sets one of the cats on fire. The cat is immediately saved. Like Sally like immediately jumps on him and puts the fire out.
Yeah.
And then she like points at the boy and says, "I hope something bad happens to you," and a ceiling tile and falls on his head. But I think it could have been cute. Like with the general tone of this movie, I think that could have just been a cute scene.
Yeah.
We saw at the beginning of the movie the desperate woman who comes to get a love spell from the ants. Yeah. We actually see her continuing saga throughout the book. So she gets what she wants, and the man that she was in love with like becomes obsessed with her, and he leaves his wife.
It seemed very clear that was what was going to happen, and then I forgot about that because the movie sets that up like very clearly, because she says like, I want him to.
Yeah,
she's terrible at wishes or whatever, you know. She says like the worst thing. She's like,
the worst thing you can
I want him to
for.
want me so bad he loses his mind. She's not wishes, something like that.
Yeah,
where it's like, okay, that's not how you make that wish, you dummy.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah.
So she gets what she wants, and then she cannot stand it because he is just up in her business all the time, won't leave her alone, is exactly what she asked for. He's obsessed with her.
Yeah.
And then she like comes back to the ants and is like, "You have to undo it. I'm miserable." And they're like, "No."
Yeah.
You made this bed and you need to lie in it.
I bet I wouldn't surprise me if that was something that was in the movie at one point in a cut of it that got removed.
Yeah, perhaps.
Because it is set up, or it also doesn't even need to come back, because I got all of I needed out of that scene.
No, and I don't think it needs to, but...
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, I immediately knew where that was going, and I didn't need to see it again to know. Like, I was like, oh, yep. Great, and you did a terrible job making your your love wish or whatever.
You were not careful enough.
And so I don't need to see her come back. I think it would have been fine too, but I get what you're saying. Yeah.
I loved the look of the house and everything in the movie. The only thing that kind of disappointed me when comparing it to the descriptions in the book is that I do not think the movie captured the garden.
Okay.
Because the garden is like... It's most of the yard at the aunt's house, and they grow like everything, and it's this like very wild, like sprawling, interesting.
Yeah, there's
place.
not a huge garden in this one. I think you get a little bit of that with the greenhouse.
Yeah, a
in
little
the
bit.
movie, which I liked. The greenhouse was a cool location, but yeah.
In the book, Jillian eventually has a lover, someone she actually does fall in love with. His name is Ben. He does magic tricks for kids, and he has a pet rabbit.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it was completely necessary to her arc in the film, but I liked Ben.
Yeah. I will say the only other thing I think my only other criticism of the movie is kind of where Jillian's story ends. And it's not a huge criticism, but it's a slight, made me a little, it wasn't my favorite, is that when Sally ends up with, kisses Gary in the yard at the very end of the movie, and they're like, oh, they're together, they love each other, amazing. Jilly is like, dressed very like dowdy. She's like wearing like gardening clothes. Well, they are gardening to be fair, but it's in very stark contrast to everything she wears the rest of the movie.
She's dressed like very conservatively.
Yes, and it sort of feels like the message is like now she's she's learned her lesson. She's not a whore anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't
agree with you. I think that's what the movie's saying.
I think it feels a little slut shamey.
Yes.
But I also think that I think the movie just would not have had time to go through establishing and properly setting up a good relationship for her. So I understand why this was cut. But I did like Ben.
Yeah, and again, I don't even think that's what the movie's saying. I think it just happens to be kind of where the scene takes place and stuff. Because the movie even makes a joke about like there's a great line in the tequila scene where Sally says, since when has our family had a problem with being a slut or something like that?
Yeah, it's like, since when has being a whore been a crime in this family or something like that?
Being a slut been a crime in this family. And it's a great line. And I don't think, it very feels antithetical to the kind of what this movie is doing to be like slut shaming Jillian, but it does feel a little weird. A little weird with kind of how it wraps up.
I agree. And my last note here for better in the book is that there's part of Maria Owen's backstory in the book that does not make it into the movie, which is that there's a scene where a farmer shoots at a crow and like just catches its wing, and then the next day Maria shows up in town with the same arm bandaged and in a sling, and then all the townspeople are like, oh my God.
That's great. Yeah, fantastic. All right, it's time to find out what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
I really liked the more active role of the ants in the movie. They're not actually in the book all that much.
Yeah, since it doesn't take place at their house, I guess that makes sense.
And I'll talk more about that in my final verdict, but I really preferred the movie's take on their characters.
Okay.
We mentioned this, but I thought it made more sense that Sally and her daughters have to move in with the ants after Michael dies, rather than them all living there and then Sally moving out after Michael dies. It just fit better with kind of our cultural perception of what might happen in that situation.
Yeah.
And it also moved the location back to the aunt's house.
Yeah.
I thought it was really nice that Jillian came to see Sally after Michael died. She makes
really
the
sweet,
trip back in. That does not happen in the books.
Oh, okay.
She calls and talks to her on the phone every week in the book, but she does not actually come back to see her.
Yep.
I thought Sally having a little apothecary in town made so much sense.
Yes.
I loved that.
Yes. I have to talk. I'm just going to talk about it now because I have it in my odds and ends, but this is as good a time as any. I could not get over, as soon as we see the little store she works in, she's selling like lotion. She says later like soaps and lotions and hand creams or whatever. And the layout of the store, the design of the store,
the aesthetic
of it, everything, the fact that it doesn't, I don't know if we ever see its name or anything, but she's a witch. So an apothecary, you could imagine it's called an apothecary. It is just Rose Apothecary from Schitt's Creek.
Yes.
I lost my mind. I was like, wait a second. Is that where they got like did they design?
Right. Is that an
show?
Intentional nod?
Yes. Is that an intentional reference in Schitt's Creek? Because it would also make perfect sense to me that, oh my god, David
Yeah.
would be like a fan of practical magic.
Oh yeah, I could totally see that being a reference he would
and
make.
would like design his store to look like Sally's store
Yeah.
from Practical Magic.
And I like next time we rewatch that,
Yes.
we're gonna have to try and like pay attention and see
yeah.
if there's a reference, because I don't know
I
if
didn't
there was a
find
reference,
any.
I wouldn't have caught it.
No,
the last time we watched it.
I searched like Rose Apothecary, Practical Magic, and like looked for a bunch of stuff. I couldn't find anything that was like a direct reference in the show, or even like an article where they interviewed like the set. I couldn't find anything. The only thing I could find was some tweets from other people who had noticed the similarity. So I'm glad I wasn't alone in that. But it blew my mind. If you have watched Schitt's Creek, go look at just search Rose Apothecary. Somebody did there's one great tweet that has like 100 likes. I think it's the one that has 100 likes. I saw two tweets. One had 2 likes and one had 100 likes. And I think the one with 100 has like 4 photos, 2 of the store from Practical Magic and 2 of Rose Apothecary. And if you look at those photos next to each other, there's no way it's a coincidence. I would be astounded if it was a coincidence. Anyways, if anybody knows any more about that, I need Dan Levy. If you listen to our podcast, please tell us. I want to tweet at him and find out.
I feel like he might actually reply
answer,
to that.
right? Yeah.
I thought the way that the movie did everything with Jimmy was so much more intense, because we don't even actually really interact with him in the book.
Yeah, because he just like shows
he's,
up. He's dead.
He's dead already when he shows.
Just
And
kinda hear about him.
we kind of interact with his ghost a
Right.
little bit in a way. But I thought it was so much more intense. And like especially the scene like when they're in the car and he's holding a lighter on his ring and he tries to brand Jillian. Like it's so awful and so intense.
I had that's another note I had in my odds and ends, but it makes sense to talk about it now. I had the same thing. I thought all of those scenes with him were in the car where he's threatening to brand Jillian and Sally's driving were legit. Like again, in a movie that is like has a horror elements, there's possession and ghosts and all this sort of stuff. Those scenes were horrifying.
Yeah.
Like truly so well done and haunting, and it's the way like he like when he starts strangling her, like just all of that was so terrifying and like well done. Oh my god, it was brutal.
Yeah.
And yes, great. And how awful it was.
I also thought that trying to raise Jimmy from the dead was more intriguing and spooky than just burying him in the garden.
Yeah.
And we kind of, we end up at the same place basically in the movie that we do in the book, where they do end up burying him and then his like vengeful spirit is around.
Yeah.
But I thought having that little kind of side quest almost,
a little
interlude where they try to raise him from the dead, I thought was a really good choice.
Yeah.
I loved the scene where Jillian puts Sally's name at the top of the phone tree. Just goes out and helps her sister get something that she's always wanted, to be at the top of the phone tree.
Yes.
And I also really loved the scene where Gary is questioning people in the town and they're telling him that these women are literal witches.
Yes.
And he's like,
okay.
What's happening here?
He's like, what is going on? It's another thing I thought was really interesting. I seen quite a few. I was looking at some IMDb reviews of this movie just to see like kind of what people thought. And one of the top review, or one of the first reviews I saw that gave the film a pretty good score, like an 8 or 9 or something, said that the only thing they didn't like about the movie was the actor Aiden something, the guy who plays Gary. They thought his performance was too subdued and like he just kind of mumbles his way through the whole movie, and I thought he was perfect.
Yeah,
I don't think it's the performance, it's the character. Like
yes, because he is playing kind of a character archetype.
Yes, he's like this very laid back kind of no nonsense,
mild mannered, no nonsense detective,
Southern detective who's like very he's like very got great manners, and he's like very kind and like whatever, and has like a very strict set of morals and stuff, but he's also like he just kind of goes with the flow and is like, I don't know, it seems like a very archetypal like that kind of character, and I thought he played that kind of character great. I don't know, I was
like
surprised
we said
to see
earlier, he ambles.
Yeah, he ambles, and I thought he was perfect at it. I don't know, I was surprised that people didn't, or at least again, there's one review that had a lot of like likes or whatever. I was like, oh, that's interesting. All right, it's time to find out what the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
We talked about the love spell with the dove near the beginning. That's pretty much directly from the book, and like the girls hiding and watching them do this, and being horrified.
Yeah.
Jillian does elope and literally like goes out the window. So Jillian was blonde in the book. Obviously, Nicole Kidman, famously redheaded in this. But Sandra Bullock is a dead ringer for the descriptions of Sally in this, because all of the descriptions of Sally are focused on like her very long, thick, dark hair.
Yeah.
And they nailed it.
Yeah.
The scene where Sally can't get out of bed after Michael dies, pretty much spot on to the book. Jillian does have a snake tattoo
like on
her
chest
it's on her wrist.
Oh, because she has
like
tattoo
she has like a flower or something on her chest, but it also looks like henna in the movie.
Does,
the one on her chest,
but it looks. I think it's supposed to be a tattoo.
Yeah,
it's there the whole time.
Yeah. The moon with the circle around it, with the ring around it, and that means trouble.
So the ring was that wasn't just I was wondering if that was like a weird like issue with like the effect or something, but the ring was specifically because they were talking about the color of the moon a lot, but I didn't remember them mentioning the ring. Was the ring something?
I think Sally mentions the ring first, and then when she's with Jillian calls it like a blood moon, I think.
Yeah. She says blood something.
Yeah, it's red at that point, but there's also still a ring around it.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, in which the ring around the moon being like a bad omen, I believe is an actual like folkloric superstition.
Interesting, yeah. That makes sense. I just because now that I think about it, I've seen the ring around the moon before. I just never...
it's like an atmospheric thing, phenomenon that happens when the weather is a certain way.
Yeah.
The flowers do grow like crazy where they buried Jimmy.
A red sun rises, blood has been spilled this night. Anyways,
and there are also toads around where they buried him.
I love the little scene in the movie. I don't know if this comes from the book at all. This is great. I forgot about this. I just wanted to mention, speaking of the toads, when they have Jillian's possessed body in the lazy boy, and then the Sally's daughters push it across the living room, and the trail of toads like trails out from behind it. I thought that was not in the book, I assume.
No.
This is so good.
Gary does ultimately use Jimmy's ring to like fake his death. To like come up with a body to clear suspicion from. We found a body that was only identifiable by the signature ring that he always wore.
Yeah,
I see you, Mr. Detective.
Yeah.
And the book and the movie end with the same lines.
Well, what was that? I don't recall.
There are some things, after all, that Sally Owens knows for certain. Always throw spilled salt over your left shoulder. Keep rosemary by your garden gate. Add pepper to your mashed potatoes. Plant roses and lavender for luck. Fall in love whenever you can.
There you go.
Not exactly like verbatim. I think they nixed the part about the mashed potatoes.
I don't remember the mashed potatoes part because like
mostly the same.
Yeah, very very similar. Just not exactly identical. All right, we got a handful of odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. So I wanted to mention this because this goes back to what I was saying about like I think one of the reasons this movie works, especially for me and us now, is that because we have this cultural kind of media soup that we've absorbed over the years of like witches and stuff. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that in this movie the dynamic is some young girls going to be raised by two eccentric witch aunts who are so basically like Sabrina. It was like, Sabrina is maybe the most famous example of this. I'm sure there are countless others. But we watched The Chilling Tales of Sabrina, which is like the Netflix original based on the Archie comic or whatever. And then obviously was it Disney or Nickelodeon that did?
That was ABC.
Or ABC, really.
Yeah.
That did
Sabrina the Teenage
Witch back in the 90s with Melissa Joan Hart. But point being, it's a young witch going to be raised by her two witch aunts. And in this film, the two aunts even have a very similar dynamic, I feel like, to Hilda and Zelda from Sabrina, where Zelda is very, very similar or reminds me a lot of Stockard Channing's, whatever her name is, and Hilda's character reminds me of the other one, where like in this movie, what's her name, Catherine Wheat or something, I can't remember, but Stockard Channing's character is like very kind of like brash and says what she's thinking and is kind of a little colder at times, but is like, that sort of thing. And then the other one is very warm and friendly and is like always wants to cook something and is like, oh, are you hungry? I'll make, like their dynamic feels very similar. And I just thought that was very interesting. And I was like, I guess this is just kind of like an archetypal thing with witches. I don't know. I think
I think it comes from, years and years of associating like spinster women with witchcraft and witches, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case in this situation or for Sabrina, because
they're literally
related, or at least that's what we're told.
Yes.
But I think we're also playing into kind of like older queer stereotypes of like these two women who
are best friends,
or they're sisters, or they're roommates.
Yes, exactly.
Two gals being pals.
Yes. No, totally buy into that. And in this instance, it's a little different because they are specifically related, or they're literally sisters. But or at least again, we're told they're sisters, and we assume they are. But again, the thing that struck me more than like the two women witches like raising a younger witch like that. Sure, it was specifically like the character dynamics of the two aunts and that they were aunts, and just how similar, like how their dynamic felt so similar to like Zelda and Hilda from
I mean
Sabrina.
That could just be a reference to
the Archie comics.
To the Archie comics, or even to the show. Because the show had been running, I think, for a couple years before the movie
this is
came
98,
out.
so that it came out,
I put this here because I kind of had like mixed-ish feelings on it. I really liked the design of the house in the movie. Like I said, it is much lighter and brighter than what's described in the book.
Which I think that was mentioned in that one thing in the prequel I read. But.
Which I also think could have been cool if it had been more along the lines of like a haunted witchy house. I think it would have given a much different vibe. But I do really like what the movie did. Dream House.
Yeah, for sure. I really loved the music throughout the film. The soundtrack, so not only the score is really good, but then also they have some great needle drops throughout. There's a great Joni Mitchell needle drop at one point. We get
Stevie Nicks, obviously.
Stevie Nicks, and then we get This Kiss, which is that Faith Hill, or is that who is?
Oh, I want to say that's Faith Hill.
I think it's Faith Hill.
Very witchy soundtrack overall.
It's fantastic, but I thought the score was just great. I really really enjoyed the music throughout the film.
Yeah, every October the main theme from this movie trends on TikTok.
Okay, there you go. Speaking of more aesthetics, the ants' wardrobes in this movie are incredible.
Yes.
Both of theirs, particularly Stockard Channing, but both of theirs are just, and everybody, honestly, the styling for everybody is great.
This movie is aesthetic goals.
It's incredible.
This is everything I've ever wanted.
Yeah, it doesn't, totally, It's like, it amazes me that you hadn't seen this movie until we watched it, because it's like your whole personality is
I was
like this
just absorbing it through cultural osmosis.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. To be a little horny for a minute, good Lord, Nicole Kidman in this movie.
Nicole Kidman was
good Lord. Look, nothing against Sandra Bullock at all. She's also stunning and gorgeous.
Too. Yeah, she looked stunning.
But Nicole Kidman in this movie
looked ethereal.
Yes.
She looked like she came from another plane.
Yes, it's wild. But also Stockard Channing in this movie.
Stockard Channing, listen, Stockard Channing is a stone cold fox.
Yes.
And I want to be her character in 20 years.
I approve. Because good Lord. She is. Yep.
There was one moment that kind of made us laugh during the really intense part when Jimmy had kidnapped them. So we open up on the scene and the car is stopped.
Yes.
And both of them are in the car.
Yeah.
And Jimmy is like 20 feet away, like peeing on the curb.
I would say even more than 20. He's like a good 20
distance
yards away. Yeah.
And we were both like, just drive away.
Drive away.
Just drive. Just pedal to the metal. Just drive.
Yeah.
Just go. What's he gonna do?
Yeah.
He can't get you.
And does he know anything about, like, could he even find them? I guess you would be worried he could find, but you're also witches. Like, I don't know.
You can figure that out. Just get away from the man.
Drive away, yeah. It was crazy to me that they were like, just drive away.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Seemed maybe like the biggest quote unquote plot hole in the whole movie.
They weren't just like
drive away.
Okay, go.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of plotting and paying off that I appreciated in this movie. So we see when Sally is writing a letter to Jillian after her husband dies, we see her using magic. Like, it almost seems kind of unconscious.
Yes, she does numerous times.
Yeah, we see her using magic to stir her drink.
Yeah.
Like, we see the spoon moving. And then later on, when she's putting the belladonna into Jimmy's bottle of tequila, we see her use magic to, like, very violently stir it up because she's scared. But I appreciated that.
Yeah, no, I thought that was good. And then my last, also she stirs, that's one of the things that really tips Gary off that she's a witch. Is he sees her stirring her coffee.
He sees her doing that as well.
There was one other quote I wanted to see if you could remember if it was from the book or not. This has a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. I will fight every fucking... What is happening? No, but there's one other quote I wanted to see if it came from the book, if you can remember very specifically, because it's a great quote, and I'm sure you would remember it if it did come. Oh, it was, since when is being a slut a crime in this family? That's not the one I was thinking, but that's the specific line from the thing. Where was the other one? It was a line after, it's when the aunts come back home. Where was that line at? They come back home and Jet says, and this is what comes from dabbling. I mean, you can't practice witchcraft while you look down your nose at it. I wanted to know if that came from the book, because I thought that line was really good.
I do not recall that being in the book.
All right. That was just another line that came to my mind because we were talking about her using magic, like kind of absent-mindedly, but like also eschewing magic and stuff. I thought it was interesting. My last note is literally the last thing I wrote was like, this movie is truly great. Again, I will fight every critic who gave this movie I just don't. It blows my mind. I thought this movie was just fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it was incredible.
Anyways, all right, before we wrap up, we want to remind you can do it a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, any of those places. Please let us know what you thought of Practical Magic. It sounded like people were excited to hear us talk about this, because we had lots of people saying, I love this movie, and I get it now, and now that we've watched it. But yes, let us know what you thought about Practical Magic. We'll talk about that on our next prequel episode. If you want to do us a favor, head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to our show. Drop us a little 5-star rating. Write us a nice little review. We would appreciate that. And then finally, if you want to support us even more monetarily, you head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Get us $5 a month. You get access to bonus content. We put out a bonus episode every month where we talk about something fun that is not based on a book, or sometimes it is, but in general, not based on a book. We just did The Adventures of Tintin, which is based on graphic novels or something. I don't know. Comics or something like that. But we just talked about that last month. We'll have another, what are we doing for?
Black Swan.
Black Swan for October. Black Swan will be out here before too long, because we got to do that before we go on our honeymoon. Yeah. So that's another thing we got to do before we go on our honeymoon.
Another million things.
Another thing on the list of 8,000 things. So yeah, we're going to do that very soon here. But yeah, and then at the $15 and up per month level, you get access to priority recommendations. So if you have something you would really like for us to talk about, you can give us $15 a month, stick around for a few months, and then request it, and we'll throw it on our list as soon as we can get to it. Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
Practical Magic is an interesting case where the book and the movie share a lot of similarities, but they also aren't very much alike. The book is a much more sprawling story. We spend a lot of time in Sally and Jillian's childhood and adolescence. We get to know Sally's daughters a lot more, and they're teenagers. The movie actually aged them down. And we also get backstories and asides with other secondary characters. The kind of sprawling, jumping around nature of the book actually kind of reminded me of Dr. Sleep, interestingly enough. In contrast, the movie pulls its focus in on the plotline with Jimmy and his vengeful ghost. Another big way that the book differs from the movie is that the ants are almost barely in the book. They're almost more like mythic figures from Sally and Jillian's childhoods most of the time. We don't even actually learn their names until they come to the rescue at the very end of the story. And the final major way that the book differs from the movie is in its depiction of magic. The book employs what I like to call plausible deniability magic. Strange things happen, but there's not really absolute direct evidence that the characters are making those things happen. It's all plausibly deniable. Much more grounded in reality, if you will. The movie, by contrast, leans more into direct magic, where we see a character do or say something, and then a supernatural event immediately occurs. I enjoyed the book. It had a witchy, pagan flavor that reminded me of my own experiences with witchcraft and others that I know who practice it. I wouldn't even mind reading the other books in the series, no promises. However, the movie's utilization of the ants as more active characters, the more focused plot, and the additional whimsy and general aesthetic of the film put it above the book for me. So this time, I'm going to have to give it to the movie.
There you go. The other thing I just remembered I wanted to talk about that we didn't, and I don't want to get into a whole other thing. So a whole thought I had about, and that one of the reasons I really loved the movie is that the whole thing is just like especially the whole exorcism at the end and all that sort of stuff is all just an allegory for getting out of abusive relationships and the sisterhood that pulls her out of it. It's just like there's this whole sort of allegory enveloping the whole thing, and it's all, I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about more of that in the next prequel episode, but I just wanted to throw that out there that I really loved kind of symbolically what the movie was doing with the witchcraft, with all of the women at the end, with what happened to Jillian and literally pulling this venom of this man out of her. Anyways, that was all great. Anyways, yes, movie's incredible. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we're tackling a horror classic that we somehow have not gotten to.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about Stephen King's Carrie.
Hey, Carrie.
And the 1976 film
Yes,
Adaptation.
the original.
Yeah, not the newer one.
Chloe Grace
I've got the vibe that people didn't really like the newer one.
Don't think it's got great reviews, though. So, yes, definitely doing the 76 version. It'd be interesting. I know nothing about this. I did a spoof for work of one of the scenes, having not seen the movie and only knowing.
You spoofed the scene that everybody knows.
The prom scene or whatever. But anyways, I've no idea. I'm very interested to see what it's actually about, because I do not actually know what this is about. I just know that scene. I have no context for what it is or anything like that. So yeah, that'll be our next episode in 2 weeks' time. But in 1 week's time, we're doing our prequel for Carrie. We're hearing what you all had to say about practical magic. And maybe we'll learn something. Who knows? Maybe not. I bet we'll get a lot of feedback for
yeah, we might have enough feedback that we
probably won't have time for a learning thing segment. But anyways, until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
watching movies,
and keep being awesome.